It's been years since I've done styrene work. This one could take a while. Welcome back to the channel, guys. As you saw in that intro, and as I kind of teased in the last video, today we're making some panels. We're doing some styrene work. It's been a long time since I messed around with styrene, so I got a little jump start and kind of figured out this rear hump. Like I mentioned in the last video, this hump will cover up the majority of my C-notch in the rear of the chassis. It'll cover up my servo and the servo arm. All I want to see is those cantilevers and those shocks sticking out. These rear tubs will get reprinted. I want them to come out a little bit further to match up with my bed hump here. And once we have those reprinted, we'll be able to glue all of this together and really be able to test this out, see how the servo goes up and down, make sure nothing's hitting, nothing's rubbing, and really be able to see how this all works out. Make sure we can go through the movement of lifting and lowering the truck and nothing hits, nothing rubs. But if I have the whole rear hump figured out already and put together as you see here, what are we doing today? Well, like I mentioned before, a whole lot of details here. We're gonna go ahead today and create some inner fenders, some under the hood paneling to cover up all of that stuff that I don't wanna see. The tires, the servos, all of that. When I open the hood, all I wanna see is nice panel work and a motor. You can see to start off, I have a paper template cut out here. This is just a rough mock-up template. As soon as we start cutting styrene, we'll be able to see if anything else needs to be trimmed, what changes need to be made, and we'll start gluing those styrene pieces into the body as well. These styrene parts will be permanent parts to the body. That way, whenever I lift it off of the chassis, it'll all come with it. And then we should, in theory, be able to drop it back down and cover up all those bits we don't want to see. I guess that means it's time to get started on cutting some styrene. Obviously, we're doing this in a time lapse because if I showed this in real time, it would be way too long of a video. But went ahead and traced out my templates on the styrene and cut it out by hand. These two side inner fenders, as I'm calling them, should be basically mirrors of each other. Should be symmetrical, so going ahead and filing those down to get the profile similar. And then the front piece that would cover the quote-unquote radiator that's covering our servos is a pretty straightforward piece as well. Then we go ahead and start our first bends. I did a couple of little tests and noticed that I could bend this styrene pretty simply. No heat required or anything, so put one very light score on the back and I'm able to bend it to the angle that I want, and we can adjust that once we get it in. Now we're going for our first little mock-up. I'm going to tape the pieces together. We definitely need to do a little trimming. Things are tight. You can see a little bowing here. I think we need to narrow up this front panel a little. And it looks like we may have to shorten these two side panels a little, but it's a pretty good first fit. Fast forwarding a little bit here because I took a step back and looked at where my panel lines were going to be. What I mean by panel lines is where each panel will end. Obviously, in true scale, this wouldn't be one completely formed panel. The inner fenders would be one panel most likely, and then the front plate that covers the radiator and such would be another panel. And I didn't really like how my panel line was going to be in the middle of what would be considered my inner fender, so I decided to bring the inner fenders all the way to the front, and now our center cover piece is a little smaller and it'll sit just like that on top. You also probably noticed that I have the hood mounted on right here. It's just a mock-up for now. I needed to make sure those hinges would clear, so had to cut out some slits for that. One other thing that may be kind of hard to see on camera, this is one of my original inner fender panels. You can see it was bent like I talked about, and when going ahead and trying to make these, I realized that it would be better to just cut them and glue the pieces together to get the angle that I wanted. I can go ahead and file this and sand that down to a curve where it looks bent after. I was able to use just some little gussets to get me a better angle, more of what I wanted, and to make sure it's consistent on both sides. The next step up is actually those speed roll panel looking lines, and I got a head start on that already. I went ahead and cut out the 2 plates and actually cut out all of my inside panels already. And these are gonna glue on to the top here. You can see me doing that here. Like I mentioned, we're doing time lapses and fast forwarding here because real time this would take forever. That's why it took so long for you to see this video. The next thing you see is me working on this center section. Now this center section that's covering the servos where the radiator would be in a full-size truck. I waited to do this part last to make sure it fit in between the inner fenders. You saw me cutting those bead roll panel lines just now. You probably noticed that you didn't see much of that in the video, and that's because that is a painstakingly slow and meticulous process. From the actual drawing of the design to cutting it, even with this thinner styrene, it still takes a little bit, and it's just a very slow process. Took a lot of time cutting and filing all of these pieces to make them fit like I wanted and look pretty good. All taped in, this looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with this actually. I have a little more filing to do around where my upper links are for the suspension. Other than that, everything looks pretty good. The last thing to do actually is going to be to try out my front suspension and make sure to actually lift up and drop down without hitting any of the inner fenders, and then we get to glue all of this in and make it permanent. Okay, I swear, one last thing and then we're gluing all of this in place. I went ahead and did a first coat of putty just to close in those seams and start rounding off those corners. I'm pretty happy. There's just a couple touch-ups left, but we'll be able to do that after it's glued all in. Mocking it up again and looking at it though, I wasn't happy with the firewall. If you could see here, there's a step back from where the firewall and the interior panels meet, and it leaves a pretty big hole there that just didn't look right to me. I wanted to fill it in, so went ahead and cut out a new firewall, and then we'll be able to glue everything else to it, fill that all in, and we'll have a really nice clean engine compartment. I'm going to use the styrene cement. I tried it out on a piece of the body that I cut off already, and it does work, but it takes some time to dry. So I'm also going to be using super glue in areas to hold things together while that styrene cement helps everything bond together. All glued in and everything went pretty smoothly, honestly. Looks pretty good. All the firewall, the inner fenders, all of those panels look really nice. I even went ahead, as you saw, and glued in that rear hump against my better judgment. I did not glue in the wheel tubs just yet because I'm thinking about redesigning these, making them a little taller, maybe a little longer as well. Think it'll match the hump a little better. Probably should have waited to glue in the hump when I had those done, but I figured while I'm at it, I'd just soon get it in place. For the big test now, let's see if it'll fit on that chassis. Can we get a drum roll for the moment of truth? Everything looks to be in place, no rubbing, all looks great. Needless to say, I am pretty happy and excited about the way this came out. The majority of the styrene work is done now. The next video you'll see will actually be the interior, where we have a little bit of styrene work to do in there as well. And then after that, I think it's finally time for some paint. I couldn't end this video without showing you guys how it all works though, so quick, wired up and that looks pretty sweet. Everything works perfect. I don't have much rubbing at all. Maybe a little bit in the back here that we can just grind down, but everything looks great. I'm really loving this. This is coming out exactly like I hoped. So, like I said, interior is up next. Make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss that video. Let me know down in the comments below, what do you think about the styrene work? Should I have just gone ahead and 3D printed everything, just like everything else? Or do you enjoy seeing the styrene work like this? I know I had a blast doing it. I have a big old mess here though that it's time to clean up. So until next time, as always, thanks again for watching. Peace.